So you understand President Xi and China better than most Americans do. Give us a sense of how he looks at this year going into 2022.
Well, this is a really important year for Xi Jinping for many different reasons. He started his reselection campaign leading up to a potential third term as president. He is still managing the economy coming out of COVID. He is facing the big question of how to reopen after this zero tolerance policy and COVID lockdown. And now his new friend, Vladimir Putin, has put him in a very difficult position as he has to choose between the relationship with Russia and the relationship still with the West, and particularly the United States.
So what about that relationship? We saw the two of them together at the beginning of the Winter Olympics, sort of pledging their troth, if I can put it that way. They're really supporting one another. At the same time, often people who are autocratic don't like violations of boundaries. And now we have Russia invading Ukraine. What is China's position here? And to what extent will they help Russia out by buying things like oil and wheat?
Great. Well, you know, it's, I guess, a certain irony that it's the 50th year to celebrate Nixon's kind of visit to China and the reopening of the relationship, which was really driven as a way to counterbalance Russia. And we're now back in looking at this triangle. Russia's move has put Xi Jinping in a very difficult position because traditionally the Chinese position is not to violate national sovereignty. On the other hand, Vladimir Putin is making certain arguments about a historical legacy that resonate for China when it comes to its position on Taiwan. But China is still very dependent on the West. Looking ahead at the economy, you know, we've talked a lot and there's been a lot of discussion about what the impact of COVID and the lockdown has been on the Chinese economy.
What has it been? Has it really hurt them badly?
Well, as we've looked really at some of the fundamentals, not as much as you would be led to believe, that the real drags on the economy have been a tight monetary policy. They have been the lack of semiconductor chips because of U.S. sanctions and the energy shortage. Xi has been starting to address all of that. They're looking at ramping up monetary policy with a stimulus program in this first quarter because that will start to hit come October, November, just as he is standing for his reselection. But also he's been addressing the energy shortage. Looking at what's going to happen with Russia, China just signed long-term contracts when Vladimir Putin was there in early February at the start of the Olympics for wheat, where Russia and the Ukraine are some of the largest growers, and for oil. But if the oil prices go up to, you know, they're already hitting 100, 150, people are speculating even 200, this is going to have a significant impact on the Chinese economy and their ability to maintain even what we speculate will be a 5% goal of growth this year.
What about the growth level? Because China has really been an engine for growth globally, not just within China, but globally. It is slowing down some. How badly is it slowing down?
Well, if you look at last year and you talk about the effect of COVID, putting aside kind of these talks of the lockdown and the supply chain, if you look at the numbers, it's unbelievable. They had an absolute banner year when it came to production and when it came to exports. So the supply chain kind of holdups weren't necessarily from China, except in some isolated cases when they did close down a port for a COVID scare or something like that. They really were an engine of growth with the rest of the world. Now, this is going to be a supply shock to the rest of the world, and what Russia has done is going to have an impact on global growth, and that is definitely going to hit China because they still are dependent on these export markets. The other area that we see it having an impact has been on consumption. Unlike in the West, where we saw a lot of consumption for goods, in China we didn't see the same thing, and we didn't see a big move to e-commerce. The concern both about the reopening and the concerns of people getting COVID, but the reopening of China, I mean, but also of now this shock to the system for Russia is that the Chinese are going to continue to save, and that's going to be a further dampening on consumption, which the Chinese have been hoping was going to be one of their big drivers of economic growth.
Before we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a lot of concerns about China, at least from the West, were about their property market. That is really suffering, as we know, starting with Evergrande, but it's gone well beyond that to a lot of companies that we thought were in good shape. How bad a problem is that for President Xi?
Well, certainly the property market was a drag on the economy last year. There's absolutely no question, and it still remains a significant part. But recent research done by the Paulson Institute shows that in many cases, we believe that property sales numbers were actually inflated and probably up to 15 to 20%. So that has an impact on what the percentage is of the property market in terms of economic growth. Where we do see it having an impact, though, is on land sales. And land sales traditionally in the provinces has been how governors or even how mayors have raised money to meet a lot of their social needs. And that now is not going to be a source of revenue, and we're going to see continuing debt in both in the cities and in the provinces is an issue that she is going to have to deal with.
What about the fiscal shape of the cities and the provinces? I have seen some reporting that says, looking forward to 2022, it might be a rough year for them. And it raises the broader question of, we think of President Xi in charge of the whole country.
Right.
There's a lot of other people and institutions below him that can put pressure on him.
Absolutely. And you think about these governors, I mean, many of them are heads of provinces that are larger than most countries. And so what they're dealing with 100, 200 million people is really significant. And with the revenues coming in, one of the things that she has done is centralized a lot of the revenues, and they give back a certain percentage to the municipalities and the provinces, but they have a large number of unfunded mandates. We're also seeing a huge shift in the population as people are allowed to travel more and go to the cities where there is economic opportunity. In those cities, the property markets will do well. It's going to be in those provinces, which are traditionally the poorer provinces also, where we're going to see the challenges to the property market, but also these inabilities to meet these unfunded mandates and significant debt issues arising.
So, Deborah, as you know so well, in the United States, it's been thought every 4 years is sort of a good year to invest because in a presidential election, they'll figure out a way for it to get going.
Right.
Is that true this year for President Xi, given what he has coming up toward the end of the year? What does that mean he can do to really stimulate the economy to make sure investment looks good, particularly for investors into China?
Well, certainly one of his campaign slogans, I'm sure, is stability. And that's what he wants to see this year. What's happening with Russia is going to have an impact on that, but I think China is going to do whatever they can, and certainly the leadership there, to try and create stability, whether it's economic, whether it's political, whether it's social, whether it's related to climate.
We're talking about social stability. It's perceived, at least in the West, that there's been a little bit of a deal between the government on the one hand and the people on the other, that the government will have more leeway to do what it wants, but it will deliver prosperity to the people. Is that under some pressure now in China?
Well, certainly with the Chinese people, there was always a hope that the economy would continue to grow and an expectation that jobs would be created for the new college graduates and that life would continue to improve. As there is these hits to the economy, as we're looking at challenges around climate change, as we see what's happening with Russia, I do think these are issues that are going to have an impact. The real test is going to be as China starts to reopen to the rest of the world and what happens and how they start to address COVID when they move from a zero tolerance policy.
And as you say, this year is particularly important to President Xi given the plenum. Do we have any sense of when that plenum is going to be?
Well, the dates don't usually get released until a little while beforehand, but traditionally they're usually around late October, early November.